Hey everyone, how's it going? Juan Dhas here, and welcome back to another YouTube lesson. And this week I thought it'd be interesting to cover how to actually learn music for a gig, because I've got a gig coming up, actually next week, and I just got sent the music for it today and thought it'd be an interesting thing to cover because, you know, there's a lot of music, some of it I haven't heard before, so I figured, you know, why not let people into the process of how I actually learned this stuff. How do I get ready? How do I prepare so that, you know, maybe for those of you who also have gigs coming up or, you know, large-scale projects in the pipeline, you can start figuring out a process for actually getting that. Or maybe if you just want some advice. Now, I want to dive right in because there's actually quite a few different areas to cover. And I'll usually kind of frame them as follows. I've got an organization thing, actually listening to the music, learning the melody, then learning the harmony. That usually covers most of my bases. So getting into organization, what is the organization aspect? The organization aspect is, okay, what tunes are we playing? Any arrangements? Are there tunes that I know? You know, actually figuring out the details of the gig. Where is it? When is it? Figure out those things. You'd be surprised because even though it has nothing to do with learning the music, just understanding that stuff makes you less stressed out. It actually gives you an understanding of what you can expect from a gig. But when it comes to organizing, especially the tunes, I'll ask, okay, are there charts? Are there any arrangements you have in mind? Actually, what are the tunes we're playing? That's a great starting point. And then based on the answers I get back from the band leader, I start organizing. I'll start putting the tunes into a little playlist so that I can listen to them. Or, you know, I'll actually start looking for versions. Or if the band leader has something in mind, I'll ask him or her to send me something along so that I can listen to it, especially if it's their music. If it's their music, you know, I really want to do it justice. And I take the same approach as a band leader. When I try set up a gig somewhere, or if I've got, you know, something in the pipeline, which I've got a couple of things, but I'll announce that further down the line as they're more confirmed, and I've got a couple of confirmations coming in. As a band leader, I try to make sure the band themselves are comfortable. I give them all the details, there's no guesswork, make sure they have their charts, make sure they have recordings, or if there aren't any recordings, maybe some MIDI mock-ups, and if there aren't those, then just really explain the tunes in general. But this is a great starting point for just making sure you're organized. Now we get into the listening portion, and the listening portion is arguably, I'd say, one of the more important aspects of learning music or prepping for a gig, because it actually familiarizes yourself with what you can actually do and what is actually going to be done on the gig. For example, what I was playing on in the intro, you know, that little progression, that's the solo section for one of the tunes on the gig. Missed a chord there, but then just 5 chord, and then back to 1 minor. But I only got that because I was listening to the recordings before I checked out the chart. And when I'm listening to the recordings, I'm establishing, okay, what are the tunes I know, if there are any? And if I don't know them, what are the hard tunes? And which are the easy ones? The easy ones I'll probably pick up by ear or just have a quick glance at the chart if there is a chart. But I'll prioritize which ones I want to work on because, I want to get the hard music out of the way. If I feel comfortable with the tough and difficult music, then the easier tunes will flow a lot more naturally. That said, never, ever, ever take tunes for granted. It always happens. It's been something that I've had to learn over the years to really ask questions. And with this, I'll check out the recording with the chart, and I'll see if there are any discrepancies. If there's a slight confusion, sometimes on a recording there's a solo section, and on the chart that solo section might not be indicated. And it could have been that band decided to do something, or the original composer decided to just do a random arrangement in the studio. But the most important thing, do not assume, always ask questions. If you spot any differences between the sheet music and the actual recording, bring it up to the band leader. They'll appreciate it. They really will. And it'll show that you care about the gig. Now, as I'm listening to these tunes, I'm not just looking out for discrepancies and things like that. I'm actually trying to familiarize myself with the form of a tune. What is the layout? Does it start with an intro? Does it go straight into the melody? Is there a drum intro, for example? If it goes straight into the melody, then what's the form of the melody? Is it A-A-B-A? Is it A-B? Is it A-B-A-C? Or is it a verse chorus? If it's a song that you're playing, I've played Fragile on a gig before, or I've played a bunch of Sting tunes and a bunch of Stevie Wonder. Some of those will follow verse, chorus, or verse, pre-chorus, chorus. Familiarize yourself with that, because it means you're going to understand the tune on a finer level before actually going in and learning the little parts, right? Actually, speaking of parts, is there a part that you play? If you're playing more contemporary music and more pop-based music, chances are you've got a part that you've got to play. You're not just playing harmony or chords. Now I'm playing more of a jazz gig, right? Actually, to be specific, it's a Colombian jazz gig, and that distinction's important because it means it's jazz mixed with a lot of Colombian styles. So then I'll pick up on the fact that, okay, this tune's a porro, this one's a pasillo, this one's a bambuco. For example, this one's a joropo, or there might be a fandango or something in there, somewhere from Latin America. And the point being is that I'm categorizing this stuff in my head so that I know that a tune isn't going to take me by surprise. This tune's a ballad, so on and so forth. I'm listening for all of these details. I'm also listening for how does someone cue sections, how does this work, how do you get from one place to another. I'm taking all of this in before actually looking at the music. Now, speaking of looking at the music, let's get right to melody and harmony. Arguably probably the most important things, and I know I sound like a broken record over the past month or so, but I really have been trying to hammer this into not only the YouTube lessons, but also my students. First things first, learn the melody. And when it comes to learning melodies for a gig, it doesn't mean just learning your part. Sure, for this gig, I've been given a lot of piano sheet music, because usually they have a piano player for this kind of tune or this kind of music, but they decided to call me. And that means I've got to kind of assimilate any parts that are important. I've got to look out for stuff. I've also got to see where I'm accompanying, where I'm taking a melody. Am I doubling or am I harmonizing with someone, so that I'm not thrown by surprise if I hear something different on the bandstand. Now, learning the melody, learning your parts goes kind of simple. Before we get into it, this is another important distinction. Should I memorize the music or should I not? Personally, I don't think there's too much stress involved. Just do what feels best for the given gig. If it's a short notice gig and it's complicated music, there are charts involved, I would suggest reading, because you don't want to mess up, right? But if you have a lot more time, or you know that these tunes are going to be recurring, you're getting called back for some of this stuff a lot, or if it's your own music, for example, I as a band leader don't like to be reading my own music unless it's very, very new, then I will go and memorize the music. For example, when I was in Dubai, I was playing maybe anywhere between 1 to 3 sets a day at the place I was working at, and part of the thing was that we had to amass a repertoire. So this music, because we were going to be repeating it or cycling it around every so often, meant that we had to memorize the music. Whereas this stuff, it can be a one-off gig, it can be something that is recurring, that depends. And it depends on the band leader, and it depends on how often you play that person and how often you play that specific music. But to get into it, now let's talk about actually learning the melody. And I would go in and start with the harder melodies first, because I don't want to be fumbling that. If it's intricate and there are a lot of, for example, in the tune I was playing, I think there was some moments where there was some string skip stuff. I'm just going off ear, but something like that. I don't want to be messing that up on the gig, or I don't want to feel anxious leading up to that point. I want that to be stone cold, right? I want that to be absolutely down pat and not have to worry about it when it comes to actually performing. Now, melodies, I will also phrase, don't have to be actual melodies. If there are bass parts or significant parts from the song, learn those, because they can be very useful cues, or they can help you get into the music. For example, if there are certain ostinatos that you would like to get a hold of, it'd be useful to know them, because maybe that'll be your cue to learning how this music works. Especially in Colombian music, a lot of it is very rhythmically driven. So there are going to be ostinatos somewhere, or some rhythmic pattern or figure. So go learn that. If there's a bass part, learn the bass line, or at least have an understanding of the bass line, so that you walk in and you're not running in totally blind, right? Now we get into harmony, and this is probably the most confusing one. If it's reading, I'll just make sure I familiarize myself with the forms and kind of get through the tune, be able to get through the tune, or make a note of where there are any odd harmonic shifts. Or, on the flip side, I'll also see what is it that I know. For example, that tune I was playing in the intro, while I've not heard that actual song before, it's familiar enough territory that I'm not sweating when I'm playing that tune. 1, 6, minor 7, flat 5, flat 6, major 7, 2, 2, 5, 1, then 1, 5 of 4, 4, then just a giant 5 chord to 1, right? It's a familiar enough progression that I'm not sweating it. However, if there are more intricate progressions, then I will go through and shed those and just make sure those movements are covered. I'll also check if there are any one-chord vamps. Why? Because this means I can ease up on having to think a lot when learning this stuff. See, okay, are any tunes vamp-oriented, or the solo sections are just one chord? Great. Then I can focus most of my time on learning the melodies and learning the actual tune, not so much the solo section. With harmony, especially, you want to be able to hear it as you're playing it. And especially if you're memorizing the music, you really want it internalized. You don't want to be playing on stage and then suddenly wondering, uh-oh, what's the next chord? That's not a great position to be in. And on the topic of solo sections, as I said before, really communicate with your band leader. Really ask them, hey, if you hear a discrepancy, this happened to me once on a gig. This was way back in Boston. I was fairly inexperienced at the time, had played very few gigs, but I got invited to play this gig, and I was checking the music, and I thought, it doesn't have a solo section. So I'm guessing it might be on the form, so let me check with the recording. But the recording just had a one-chord vamp in C minor and 7, so I thought, okay, easy enough. But we never shedded that tune in rehearsals. And later on, we got to the gig. I thought, okay, this tune's coming up, just relax. It's going to be that one-chord vamp in C minor, in 7. You're prepared. You've shedded the melodies. You know this tune. And then suddenly I realized the form for the solos is actually the melody form itself. And I froze immediately. I had a pretty negative reaction. Luckily, the band leader kind of rescued me. He just took over the solo. And, I profusely went up and apologized to him after the gig, saying, I don't know, we never covered this in rehearsal, and I was listening to the recording, I was going off the recording. He said, we just decided that last minute in the studio because the original musician had a tough time soloing over the melody form, so we just told him to play over this one-chord vamp. But somehow that was never communicated on both fronts. So, what did I learn from that? Well, for one, don't blame anybody else. You take responsibility for the fall. And two, always be clear. Always ask questions. As I said earlier, never, ever, ever assume that something is for granted. If something is if you have any questions or any doubts at all, check with the band leader. As I said earlier, they will appreciate that, and it shows that you care about the music. So hopefully all of this kind of gives you some ideas for how to go about learning this. It sounds like a long process, admittedly. However, what I will say is that over time, what I've done is essentially break down what is a much quicker process. A lot of this is kind of automatic or autopilot, or how I would normally set up a gig or prepare for one. I don't have this methodical thing. I've just done it so much that now it is quite natural. And it's quite natural for me to communicate with the band leader or the other musicians. I'm not making it a point to do so. It's just something that I've integrated over time. So if you're worried about this feeling like a lot of steps, don't worry about it. Try this next time you have a gig, or when you don't have a gig and you're trying to learn a piece of music. Consider that process, and over time it will become easier and it will become second nature. Don't think that you have to have all of this ready to go. Just worry about starting and worry about getting yourself in motion. The rest will come with time, and as I've referred to with my story, with experience. So I hope this lesson's helpful for you all, and I will announce more about this gig once I've got the final details confirmed. And I've got another gig coming up in April. That one's been confirmed here in Colombia. It's at Empau. If you're willing to come down, I'm doing 2 master classes and the show, and I'm reuniting with the trio, so this is going to be fun. And I might have some other stuff coming up in the pipeline, so do stay tuned for that. Until then, I'm going to jump over to Patreon, do a little example, and I will see you in the next video. Take care, guys.